And now it's weird because I actually have this one prepared, so it feels completely something completely different. So this morning actually turned out to be a good introduction to this talk. This is a story of something, basically everything that happened around EventStorming in the last years, and how it evolved, and if you're here, I guess you want to learn a little bit more about EventStorming. A little bit about me and how it started. I still don't know, how to explain my job to my mother. My mother, I mean, not really suggesting me to cut my leg like I did this morning, but she has this problem of talking with friends and what is your job exactly? And yes, I run this company, Aggregates, and I'm consulting, I'm running training, running workshop, I'm helping out the company. That's mostly the most important thing that I do. I try to model things which are as complex as possible with sticky notes and the paper roll. And I started calling this stuff EventStorming. There's also some variation, but that's the thing we're going to talk about. How did everything started? It actually started with a local meetup. At that time, I was leading the local DDD mailing list. It was not really a community because it was much distributed, maybe also because of me. But they wanted to. The discussion in the mailing list were too abstract for some of my friends, so this guy actually invited a trap meetup with this goal. Like, they wanted to have the people in this meetup, like, I have this business problem, now I want to see how their aggregates are going to look like. And at that time, I was traveling with the IKEA paper roll in my backpack. Because of my agile coaching, I needed to have something to use when the meeting room I was given was not good enough. And so, okay, well, this was a significantly complex business domain, and I started to put stickies on a paper roll. And then, okay, I think that might be my prototype solution. What about yours? Raise my eyes. I looked like nobody else in the room was working. And this is my model. Where is yours? None. And everybody was looking at me in a weird way. What did you just do? I just modeled the flow. What did you do in the meanwhile? Looks like I was the only one working. So I realized there was something interesting with that, and I started playing with that. Experimental workshop, educational workshop, professional, and then, yes, I started talking about it. Like in 2013, I wrote the first blog post about EventStorming, and the characteristic of this blog post, which is still one of the key sources, is just I talked about one single path from business discovery to aggregate discovery. Because at the beginning, it was just like the whole thing. Unfortunately, that is not the real story anymore. And maybe the reason for this talk is try to cover up the false information I gave at that time. I mean, I believe that, but now I know that the story is kind of different. 2017, right now, well, the thing is growing. I have been talking just even today with people using EventStorming in weird and unsuspected ways, interesting ways. That is fantastic, so I'm having a lot of fun with that. And many practitioners, they led to many different ideas. There is no such thing like an orthodoxy in EventStorming, except for using orange sticky notes as domain events. But I needed to, clear up the situation a little. So there are many different formats, not only one. And big picture exploration, process modeling, software design. These are the three I'm going to talk about in this talk. I also use EventStorming for retrospective. I also use EventStorming for induction. Every new hire in my company gets EventStorming on the first day. They learn about what we are doing by discovering it. I use EventStorming for studying history with my daughter and also for doing something more. So it's a very flexible format. However, let's start from recipe number one, which is the messiest, which is the big picture EventStorming. So the idea at the beginning is, how many of you have been doing EventStorming here already? Okay, less than a half? Okay, good. So this is where everything starts, just like the the tricky set of ingredients is just invite the right people, like it was easy. I know I'm just kind of cheating with that. But business people, IT people, maybe user experience people, I mean, I don't want to exclude anybody. And if you really want to join the party, you can join the party. Tricky things are provide unlimited modeling space, the surface, the paper roll as long as possible, the long straight wall. I mean, every little obstacle on the wall might turn into a problem, sometimes into an opportunity, but it's really interesting to see how lazy we are. I mean, just a column might be stopping the business, or a normal window frame. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I had a very large group of 20 people working on a window, but they were, I mean, two blockers, and nobody wanted to put the first sticky note on the other window. So it's weird, but nobody wanted to break the implicit rule of we're gonna model inside the frame. And markers also, stickies, everything has to be there in great abundance. So the idea is just like infinite buffet of modeling resources. The other thing which is relevant is the whole business line. So I tried not to have a fixed scope type of exploration. I've never done it with the huge conglomerates like that have so many different business lines. I mean, this case doesn't make sense. You cannot fit in the same picture. But are you making money out of a business? I want to see everything from the beginning to the end. You can do it. It just takes meters. That's the only thing we need. How do we model that? Basic building blocks is just, we just need to establish a timeline. We need some facilitator tricks because especially in corporate edition, it's something like a standoff. Nobody wants to look like an idiot. Everybody wants somebody else to make the mistake first. So you just, yeah, you go first. No, you go first. You go first. Then if you manage to have an icebreaker, maybe your secret ally inside the company, or just somebody that tries to put something on the wall and break some, dysfunctional patterns like, circles, little committees, or I'm telling you what to write, you write. If you break them, then suddenly ignites. Actually, this little standoff is usually less than a couple of minutes, but it might be weird in some companies. It already tells something. I mean, if the company is really dysfunctional, this moment could be really, really awkward. But then you know, well, this company is dysfunctional. Then, what happens next? Well, that's the notation we use for starting. Domain events, or in sticky note, verb at past tense, relevant for domain actors. Maybe this one is even redundant. It is funny, I've been choosing the simplest possible notation, but still it's not perfect. So I'm not even expecting this to be running completely in a perfect way. Just like we try to write them in past tense, and maybe some of them will need to rewrite them. For some people, it might be already hard to rethink what you're doing at past tense. But that's already telling us something. What is the problem? That's the thing I was mentioning early this morning, the shape of the organization. Everybody knows their own stuff very well, but they don't know very well what happens in the other silo. And I was saying this morning, silos are not intrinsically evil, but they just happen because of it is actually a local optimization to reduce the knowledge of everything else that surrounds us. And also inside corporate lives, it's just I mean, you join in a company, you have a couple of weeks where you can ask every single question. Oh, what are you doing in this office? What are you doing in this office? And it's totally okay. You're the new guy. You can. If you let 3 months pass, then you stop asking those questions. I mean, you will look like an idiot. You've been working here for 3 months. You still don't know what they are doing in this office. What happens if you let 5 years pass without asking what they are doing in that office? I mean, large corporation, you even discover that there are offices that nobody mentions, but you still may be playing soccer with the same guy or having a coffee with the same guy without knowing exactly what his job is. Just funny, and that's it. So you stop asking those questions, and then you are supposed to know, but you don't. So it's actually a good chance to, recover the lost time about learning what your peers are doing all day long. That's the shape of the knowledge. Again, that's another slide that I used this morning too. But so I'm going to be quick. This knowledge is fragmented. This knowledge is incomplete. It's partial. Some people left. Some people really know about something and then left the company. There are some things which are still a mystery. There are some things that are told to you, but people you shouldn't trust. Just pretend that they knew the thing, that you will never know that they are lying up to the moment where it's too late. So one of the things that happens, the first round is just people are basically modeling their own silo, and looks like it's locally consistent but globally inconsistent. And then you ask them to enforce the timeline, try to make a whole story consistent, and suddenly you start triggering conversation because they realize, that's not exactly the same thing. Oh, that event you put over there, that's actually the same event I have here, so I had to move it. But then you're calling it differently, and then I need this thing to happen first. People start to talk, and people start realizing the story is not exactly okay. The other thing, talking is one thing, commenting is another one. So as a facilitator, I start adding purple sticky notes to highlight the places where the conversation becomes hot. I call those places hotspots, and maybe it's just questions, maybe just remarks or whatever. Maybe people start in a fight. I just stop the fight, put a red marker, and then move on. Purple. There is no red in sticky notes, unfortunately. Anyway, what happens in the big picture is the structure now starts emerging, and you start to see people and systems also, and every little bit of extra notation triggers a new type of conversation. We start talking about interaction with external systems. We start talking about who's doing what. We start talking about what is a whole organization of the thing. What looked like chaos now starts to become a structure. Now people start to see what is happening and understand it, and even silently making sense of it. Globally, it means now we can see the whole thing. The whole thing is there and start making sense even more. We built the whole thing. It's not a printed activity diagram that somebody handed out to us. It just doesn't work in this way. This is something we made it. And the other thing is just we learn massively. We know what the other department is doing, and we start getting consensus about what is the most important problem over there. You start to see business narratives. That's what happens to a customer in this way. That is what is happening to another player in this field. And there might be another path for maybe a partner, something going on like this. These are stories. You can have multiple storytellings over the same platform, but the key advantage of this storytelling, made up sequence of events, is just like they are simple to understand. Still, they are very robust. They are validated. You can't cheat with stories. You cannot fool your kids in telling a wrong fairy tale when suddenly Red Hood goes in the woods. There's the wolf, there's the grandma, and there is Batman. Who the hell is Batman? Was not part of the story. Your kid is gonna no. Well, Batman was not part of the original setting. So if something doesn't make any sense, somebody's gonna tell something. And by the way, that's also one of the way bad legacy pops out in these scenarios. You have a step that doesn't make any sense storytelling-wise, business-wise. Why do you do that? Oh, we have this old legacy system that we had to feed with this data. Well, no, that's not part of the story. That's part of your burden and self-inflicting pain. And notation is as cheap as lo-fi as possible. So totally no UML, no BPMN, anything that is precise would kill that conversation. I need the conversation to be open to everybody, precision. too early, it's just killing that conversation. So I don't want to choose a language, like even when talking about people, it might be actors, it might be roles, it might be humans with a given name, it might be personas. I don't care. It's just like I need to make visible that somebody is doing something, and I don't want to choose any notation, because then I'm going to declare a tribe like a winner. So events are just part of storytelling. External systems, for example, they have a very fuzzy definition, which is whatever you can put the blame on. So it might be, in some system, we had bad luck as an external system. We had Europe, we had the market, and then we had, PayPal, Facebook, and then we had some other piece of software that was actually playing the role. But whatever could be displayed. So at the end of this journey, what we had is no scope limitation. So we start seeing the whole. We try to include all the boundaries of the system, meaning like external system and people, things which are not completely under our control, and which means like now I have the guarantee that I expanded the horizon so much that the problem is clearly inside my observation point. If there is a problem, is in one of the purple hotspots. So the key result is, yes, clarity. Now I can see this. I can see this whole mess, and it's not exactly that messy anymore. It's still messy. We put labels, we put structure, we realize what is happening. We had a good discussion in sorting out this mess. But we get to this point of, okay, it's kind of manageable. Maybe it's horrible, but it's manageable. So the real outcome, when you can see it, is actually this one. You have a clear business narrative and a massive blocker. This is true especially for established companies. And yes, with some recurring patterns of blockers, like mostly, there are two things usually, maybe the same thing in different disguise. Software-wise is usually something like a class which is at the intersection of 2, 3, maybe more bounded contacts that haven't been separated. Process-wise, it turns out being a decision which is too hard and necessary, and people waiting to do a given step because they are not in the right position for doing it. Anyway, the other thing that we start doing is, voting this stuff at the end. Just choose what is your problem. I mean, we have many problems, but at the end of the workshop, we vote, and we have a figure like this, something like you have a business narrative, many problems, and people voting on one. That's the end of the workshop, basically. Can you see the power of this? Like, a lot of stuff, maybe a lot of problems, but then the voters. I mean, the service overall is basically this one. Yeah, Swift kick in the butt. Because you show everything to the company, everybody, you reach consensus. This is problem number one. Then you can only do two things. Or you attack problem number one the next morning, or you go on LinkedIn and change the company. Because if the company is like, oh, great, this is problem number one, but I have to do this first, because, you know, the backlog is long, we have so many other things to do. I know this is problem number one, but yeah, you know, the backlog, we promise stuff. If your company is like that, LinkedIn is the solution. If instead your company wants to solve the problem, well, turns out that the backlog is less important than the problem. Turns out that estimating around the problem is not relevant, because the problem is hard. Oh, yes, that's the most important problem for the company, but you have only up to Friday to solve it. Doesn't make any sense. I mean, it makes sense on non-core strategies because of this. It's budget limited, on time and on budget. The most important problem, it takes all the time needed to solve. And I cannot guarantee that the first experiment is going to work. Maybe the second one is needed. Maybe we discover that this problem is too tangled with many other things that the solution is not going to be easy. Well, part of the game. A couple of things. When doing this in a startup, well, maybe the bottleneck is not so important. It's too early to see the bottleneck. You're not making money yet. Invitation are a piece of cake. Put all the key people in the same room, well, they're already living in the same room. It just needs to be large enough. The attitude is great, easy, and there is no past to compare with, which is a really good thing. Big picture in a mature company becomes harder, mostly for this problem. Like, the mistakes have been done in the past, and a lot of things are displaced. Like, usually, just inviting the people is already more than half of the job. Like, oh, can't we do it remotely? Or is it really necessary to call all of these people in the same room? You know, it's very, very expensive. Well, how long would you go without knowing what the problem is? And then it's kind of paying off a lot. But if inviting people is already a mess, or, well, if this person is coming, I am not, choose one. We cannot be in the same room. Well, can we solve this problem writing more software? I guess not. So all of this corporate dysfunction, all of this stuff is just visible there. Dungeon Master, well, might be one of the biggest blocker in the company, the author of the past software, unconsciously doing everything possible not to change the legacy implementation. One of the most common problems I encounter. That's more or less what we discover in the big picture exploration. Tough, demanding. We did it with up to 35 people in the same room. Some friends actually did it in a more structured workshop with up to 60. I mean, it's huge, it's big and messy, and it takes a lot of energy, but it's really, really rewarding. Let's change the ingredient and go to process modeling. Process modeling is just like the scope is smaller, and the goal is to work on the solution, not on the problem discovery. So that's more or less the setting. It might be a feature or a set of features or an epic, or I don't actually care the way you split these things. I just care about the value you deliver at the end. I'm not really a fan of this initiative, epic, feature, story, task type of things. I think it's paranoid. Anyway, the starting point is usually a user with a given action, a command, a blue thing. Like, that's somebody clicking the button, initiating some action. And the outcomes here are usually, well, domain events, more than one, the end condition, the expected outcomes, maybe even our acceptance criteria, and some read model, like this information needs to be visible for some user in order to be happy. So, talking about user story, how do they fit with this exploration? Well, the real answer is, I don't know exactly, because every company thinks they're doing user story, every company is doing user stories differently. I just simply don't trust user story that much, or I just trust the original definition, which is a placeholder for a future conversation. We started using user stories on index card because index cards were too small to contain the actual specification. So the idea was, you don't write the specification on this one. Now some of the tricks is just like, well, you attach the Jira AD item so that you can have the specification attached. That's not the way I like to develop software. But even if you have the small one, it's a placeholder for future conversation, and EventStorming, beginning of the iteration, is a pretty good way of making this conversation happen. You just have, again, the key people for this feature in the room, and you facilitate the conversation around a slightly more sophisticated notation. So we have this color puzzle thinking, like a read model is used by a user in order to choose a given command that goes to a system, might be external or might be us. It will result in an event. There will be some policy triggering some reaction, and then the whole loop might be turning again. Let me explain this notation a little more. Command, decision, again, I'm fuzzy by design. I just started calling it command because I'm coming from this DDD community, so it felt obvious, but I call it also decision, task, action, the blue thing, whatever. I don't care. I just need the people to think in this way. But it's a decision taken by a user, and it's funny because it's already triggering some complex thinking in terms of what should I put in there. It's just start this, open this, it is an action. It is seen from the inside, from the outside. So good brain thinking. Policies is actually the most interesting part of this exploration. And it's the way for us to discuss them is whenever an event, then a command, is reactive logic, is how our system reacts to give an event. But the trick here is, I'm sorry, it really sounds stupid, but when modeling, it's just working. We just need the lilac between the orange and the blue. So it's color pattern. I have an orange, I'll need the blue over there. There must be a lilac in the middle. And then we start to investigate what happens under the lilac. Getting back to my friend Dr. House, this is where everybody lies. We did it on ourselves. It was funny to see that even in my company, there were some places that we were implementing differently. Me, I thought that I was trustworthy. I was the boss, and was saying, oh, in this case, in case of refund, we do this and this and this. And then my colleague Alexandra was telling, like, well, in fact, we do that instead. Well, I didn't know. Yes, we changed the policy. The boss is telling something, the workers are telling something else, two colleagues are implementing a discount policy in a different way, and you don't know until you ask. The payment is supposed to arrive immediately. Well, not exactly immediately. It's actually immediately when the person is available, which is only 2 days per week. This is where you start digging, and you discover that the story is a little bit more complicated than it looks like. So in general, ambiguity does not compile. And this is why we need to shift from the mood of the big picture event storming, where everything is actually allowed, to now we are in design phase. Ambiguity is not OK. What happens in the policies, when they actually map a lot of spectrum of stuff from implicit policy, like, oh, yes, whenever this happens, I have to remember to do this. One of the implicit policy, like, looks like automatic, like whenever there is some incoming payment, well, the policy is we don't want to go to jail, and we write the corresponding receipt. And, but it's not like immediately, even in this case, we have more or less 1 day, or maybe even more if we don't mess up with the numbers, because, yeah, sometimes people have days off. And the second thing might be explicit policy. The company grew, and then you have to make an explicit rule that maybe is followed by all the people, or you might discover that you have exception. Then the more the company grows, the more you go into automation. You might have listeners, sagas, process manager. This is people from one single person remembering and doing things by gut feeling to establish rule collaboration, then to automation, software, more sophisticated implementation. Every reactive thing is a policy. When company grows, that actually shift from, yeah, human agreement to automation here. The other thing we do here is actually, yeah, challenging value. The moment we see the flow going, we start asking, is it worthwhile? Why are we doing it? We start, the trick we use is little sticky notes, green and red, green for value created, red for value destroyed. And I mean, things in a flow happen for a reason. User are clicking the button for some reason. It might be a policy, an internal rule. I mean, the reason is you pay me for this. Or it might be something else, especially for external users. But it's funny, because that's a question nobody asks to software developers. And the moment you start ask this question, you discover that everybody thinks that value is money, till the moment you realize it's not true. I mean, people would do something maybe just to reduce anxiety. There was one of the things we were, when modeling a refund process, there is this moment where a customer receives the money via bank transfer, so it looks like it's okay. Well, money-wise, he's got the money. Emotionally, he doesn't know he has the money, so he's still in the angry state. I'm waiting for this money, which is in practice, I received this money, but I don't know yet. And so at this moment, there is still this anxiety, which is part of his state, that hasn't been completed. So we can make the two things match, like tell him, like, payment is on the way, everything okay to reduce this anxiety, and make sure the money currency is sorted out. Or it might be good things like, yeah, just pure happiness, safety, self-respect, whatever. We might realize that in implementing a feature, there are so many value currencies in place, not all of them material, or maybe the material part is not really the most important one. That's the best thing. That was even the most demanding slide. Just look at this bright, rainbow-like type of implementation. The thing is, it's probably the best result for me in EventStorming. I could have multiple conversations happening around the same platform. It is events. Events are storytelling. Everybody can join a storytelling conversation. So I can have in the same room conversations which are about lean value generation, about user experience and service design, business modeling, and performance optimization. I'm not choosing a specialized language. I'm letting the language emerge during the conversation. This enables cross-perspective conversation. And this is actually good because from roles you can switch to, well, we have problem solvers around the problem. Let's design a solution together. It's actually great days when it's working, but never said it was easy. It's good, it's rewarding. Why it's hard? It's hard because we switched from exploration mode, where everything was allowed and nobody was right, to a mode where you need to reach an agreement. You need to reach consensus, so you need some special tricks. And one of the most important is just make every topic of discussion visible. You make sure you're never discussing about invisible things, and but also you have to manage egos. If there are friction about this solution versus this solution, maybe you need more space, maybe you need more option to choose from, and yeah, you need some extra tricks. Not expecting this to be hard. Also, we are not trained. When we do complex modeling, usually it's a solo activity. Making it a collaborative activity, it's rewarding, gets buy-in, but it's, yeah, kind of tough. Needs tricks, needs discipline, and a lot of stickies. Then we get into software design, which is probably the toughest activity. I mean, it's among the cruelest sports on the planet. An architectural discussion between two software architects is a very violent type of game. Of course, it's not real violence, but you know how hard it could be, the discussion between how to structure a REST API and how to, I mean, I know people that left the company because of indentation. So it's, we are weird people. And there's another problem on the table, which is if you've been trying to do EventStorming following my old article, there's a little bug in this article, which is this one. The moment someone pronounces the word aggregate, suddenly the business people find something more interesting to do. It just feels like, how you put me in a trap. You just kidnapped me for these 3 hours just because you need some help in naming your aggregates. Start feeling like manipulating people. That's not the reason why we want them in the room, but I started trying to postpone the aggregate as much as possible. And it was a hard thing to do because, yeah, people like you in the DDD community, they wanted to see the aggregate. Remember the beginning? Yeah, I want the shortest path to the aggregate, and I made the path longer because there's one more thing first. So to put in another way, the aggregate is not a business problem anymore. It's still a business problem because it just turns out the software flexibility, but it's not a problem the business perceives as their own problem. We still play with the color puzzle thinking. We do a more precise separation between the aggregate, that's a part of the system we are designing, and the external system. And even the policy, sometimes is established, sometimes it's something we have to design. The scope is more or less the same, still really depends. And the techniques to investigate the aggregate is actually, we are looking for a small state machine which are specific to a given bounded context. I'm expecting a relatively small number of states, so something like maybe 4, 5 is a good rule of thumb. I mean, if you have 12 states for an aggregate, I'm pretty sure it's doing more than this. If, like a company was working with, you have 120 states for the aggregate, there's something really evil going on. Call an exorcist, not a consultant. And but it's clearly, in this case, looks like this number was a Cartesian combination of 3, 4 state machines put in the same box. The other thing is just don't focus on the data. Don't look at the data. This aggregate is the thing receiving commands, emitting events. Ignore the data. The data goes into the read model. Postpone naming. You look what is information needed inside the box to trigger some given behavior. Look at what is contained and name the class later. And yes, don't fall in love with your intuition, which means every time we try to model the aggregates, people feel like, I need to name it. How do I name it? Oh, this is clearly a customer. How can you say clearly? We don't have any single information, but feels like it's so horrible to see an empty sticky note without a name. So we need to provide a name. And if you provide this name, it's just like reasoning, like it was a class diagram, only with sticky notes. Again, I'm not trying to solve the problem with the same strategy, only with more colors. No, I need a different strategy. So the recommendation, you have 2 ways. 1, postpone naming. 2, well, trash them, try again after you find some naming. So what starts to happen is, the immersion of those ubiquitous languages. So not only one, even if when working, an aggregate is inside a bounded context, it has only one consistent language, but you're working with more. And one of the things that happens is just you have to slowly introduce consistency in the conversation. I said slowly, like don't be in a hurry to write down stuff to match your pre-existing mental model. Symmetries are your best friend when you can find them. Looks like there's something consistent here. Payment, enter payment, payment entered. Okay, looks like this is probably a payment, or maybe not, still not guaranteed. But if you have something which is, the command is telling one thing, I had something like the command was buy ticket, the aggregate name was reservation, and the event name was purchase process initiated. Well, looks like there's something really weird going on. But sometimes also the lack of symmetry is telling something, like there are conversations happening at different levels. The user might not need to know all the complexity of the implementation. The user might live in a fairy tale world when you just click the button and the magic happens at the end of the flow. You know that something more complicated is happening there. So you might have 2 languages, one on the surface, one in the abyss. And brute force doesn't work, and this is your best friend. I mean, that's the best measure of quality of an EventStorming session. How filled up is your trash can? Well, they have to be orange and blue, but that's the thing. Rewriting events. And that's funny because we thought we wrote all the events in the big picture exploration. Now, this is exactly where we start injecting a lot more precision. This is also where companies kind of freak out about me, because on day 1 looks like I am the master of chaos. I'm just summoning a chaotic place where everybody can do whatever they want. And then on day 2, I start being like, why did you write this? No, can you please change this little thing? Well, maybe you should use this word instead. And you were about chaos. Yes, that was day 1. On day 2, I am, Mr. Right, and I'm about precision. And so we start rewriting every single sticky note, and everything changes. One of the things that started being really visible is just like, okay, it's not only one language. Bounded context started to be visible in the flow. They are already visible at the big picture level in some ways, but here, okay, now I know I'm solving one problem, then this is solving another problem. Also, we start adding the key information, like I probably need this transaction ID here. I'm collecting this username at that event. Okay, now I can make the whole process consistent. Again, more trashing. The key thing is, okay, that's probably the secret source of this explanation, because this is probably overkill for simple problems. But this approach is really good because I self-selected the problem. Again, Dr. House style. I've selected the problem which is on the bottleneck. The problem on the bottleneck is probably some problem that people already tried to solve because it's clearly there, it's important, we tried to solve it, didn't work. So it wouldn't have an obvious solution. I need to try something alternative, and that's something that requires time and retry. So don't try to force in the brute force approach, the old crowd thinking, oh, this is clearly the customer, this is clearly the order. What's the problem? The problem is not working, so we need to try something different. Great game changer for me was, that's probably the biggest impact CQRS had on me. Separation of write model and read model forced me to think about the read model and to provide a new definition for that. It's not just data. We are not exposing what is available on the database. It's just decision-making tools. Is the data that needs to be displayed on screen at the moment the user is making a given decision. This is the perfect tool to make this decision simple. And it's also a great conversation tool. Like, how much time I have? Sorry? Okay. So one of the typical example is how to fill up the timesheet. If you fill up the timesheet on time, you can just use your phone. I mean, at the end of this day, I was working on this project, so put 8 hours on this project. Phone knows that it's me, maybe even knows the location, easy stuff. But I don't do it. Well, that's me being Italian. Maybe you don't do it too. So what happens is something like 1 month later, somebody's asking you, Alberto, you didn't fill up your timesheet. I still have this mobile app, which is now completely useless. It's just like, no, 1 month later, in order to provide exactly the same answer, how many hours, which project, on which day, I need to, open my laptop, look at Google Calendar, what was I doing that day, maybe look at my commit log on GitHub, if that was a good day where I could write some code. Let's look at the emails, what was I doing? Let's look at the phone record. That's my read model for that filling up the timesheet. That's the information I need to have available to fill up this timesheet. And if you can make this information available in a quick and readable way, maybe you can even suggest, like, I think you were in Berlin that day. Maybe KanDDDinsky is the project you were working on. Okay, good. Many times, things are not happening because we are making this decision hard, because we are needing them to be sitting, looking at the data in order to provide an answer. It's just a field. No, it's not. And don't let reuse get in the way. Oh, if you have a lot of data and you can use the same data to make different decisions, let's just give you a summary screen. No, forget about it. It's crap. You're working on the bottleneck. You're working on the core domain. You try to make the most important problem of the company get easy. You make a new page for that. End of the story. So there is actually a process for that, which is try to understand what is the mechanics of the decision. Like, it's not so easy, and sometimes you get into dirty little secret, which means in my company, for example, I try to explain everything that was behind the decision that I wanted to delegate, sometimes saying like, well, I have no idea, just pick a number. Oh, is that everything that you do? Yes, I'm not a pro. But in some other companies, what you get is something like, well, you have no idea. I mean, choosing the price is something very, very complicated. Well, it takes a lot of reasoning and a lot of experience and blah, blah, blah. You're not telling me the answer. You're just creating a fog screen between me and the truth. So you don't know exactly. The other thing is many decisions are rational, but they are also emotional. Like there's something which is happening, well, maybe because of the color of the background screen, maybe because of the speed. I mean, everybody knows like how important it is the time to render a page in order to have conversion rates, or it might be the font, it might be the size of the images, whatever. Decisions are not necessarily rational. Then you define the necessary data. Try to understand exactly what is the data needed to help this decision. define your data set and the page layout, because it's the combination of the two that makes the data readable. Then you just make it happen. Well, you're a software architect. You have all the possible tools to make it happen. It might be projection, it might be composite UI, mashup, Google queries, views, stored procedure. I don't care. You know all of them. If not, you have to know all of them, whatever it takes to make this number. We are on the most important problem, no excuses. Second thing is just we need the product owner badly in the room. Exploration is needed in order to challenge the model, and we are really good at this. We do a lot of what if for something that is not really happening. Oh, what happens if you have two simultaneous things happening in the same millisecond? That's a question I had with my company when dealing with selling tickets for a training. And I sell 3 tickets per day on a good day. Are these 3 tickets happening in the same milliseconds? No, I don't care. If they do, I will offer a free ticket, maybe a special nerd discount, because the customers are people like you. Oh yes, a critical race condition special discount. Well, that might be a great opportunity, not a problem for me. But software developers are really good in exploring situations that are very, very unlikely to happen, and which is good, is one of our secret superpowers. But product owner is needed to say, like, this is not going to happen. If it happens, you talk with me. You don't need to write software for that. And but it's something like I like exploring even unlikely condition, or something that the product owner is saying, like, this is not really interesting right now. If we can spend half an hour knowing about the troubles, it worthwhile. So what happens is during this modeling session, well, the fuzzy definition will get progressively rewritten. It's funny to see, like, we get crude ingredient, like very, very fuzzy, and we get into more and more precision along the way. There is no such thing as over-design. We are exactly on the core. We are able to manage happy paths and corner cases. And yes, we are expecting a lot of this healthy thrashing. The final thing is what I call this Bruce Lee state. What do I mean for Bruce Lee state? It's actually the moment you added so many critical conditions, then you start feeling, yeah, some more requirements, dude. You feel like you're so confident about your model, your implementation, that, yeah, just give me some more ideas, or you start proposing more ideas, like, why don't we do that also? We can actually do that. We can put this together with that. And if you remember the theme of this morning about safety, it's all about this. I can do this, I have this, I can combine them, and it's great. It's not like, oh, it's going to be a mess. It's completely different. So if we get to this feeling of this model is exactly the right one, it's supporting the business, that's the best indicator, is the confidence, is the feeling, is asking more stuff to the business. So, takeaways for this talk. The first thing is kind of stereotypical. So it looked like a single recipe at the beginning. Now, EventStorming is actually like a pizza. There is some basic ingredients, like my tomato mozzarella is the timeline and the domain events. And you can play with this in a different flavor. You can add your toppings with 2 notable exceptions. Please, no database tables, no pineapple. And the other thing which is interesting is we had all of this shifting of the DDD community towards domain events, and looks like, oh yes, you are migrating to event-driven architectures and blah, blah, blah. No, after all these years, like domain events are definitely a better choice for describing the business. They are good. It's storytelling. Storytelling is the way humans started grouping, gathering together. Storytelling is how we made myth, legends, and also religions. Well, they can also describe a business. So And they are better for the business conversation and even for double-checking the business. If the storytelling is not right, I usually ask some innocent question. What about this step? Doesn't make sense. And sometimes the whole business kind of collapses because this step is actually not making sense. It might be completely flawed. And, but also, it's really good for implementing the supporting software. And it really looks like the best way to discover things, to end up with an architecture which is, more, it's not even more flexible, it's more resilient, it's actually more tolerant to change. One of the best success story of this, the combination of EventStorming and event sourcing plus bounded context was a company that was completely designed from scratch, 3 days of EventStorming with the founders. So we did actually like the article version. We did the whole thing from the big picture to the implementation, and it took them 8 months to deliver the whole process, because it was in the financial market, a lot of money laundering, regulators, approval from the European Central Bank. I mean, it's not a single functionality. The MVP was actually 8 months. They delivered the MVP, they went on the market, and they discovered the market was a little bit different from their business expectations. So they started pivoting, challenging, moving to different integration, having different partners. And, well, the architecture was working perfectly. They just could be really flexible, rechanging some portion of the business, changing the connectors. The architecture proved really, really robust and flexible at the same time. Another thing that is really interesting is we started to see from the early stages the different level of abstraction of the domain event. So there's something that looks like more like a general purpose language, like this example is coming from my company. A training class is on sale once it's published on the website, and it's the ticket could be sold through our external provider. But this is already a little bit too much of the implementation. This is something which is inside this publishing bounded context. The rest of the company just need to know that sales are open, and maybe there is the URL of the web page to link it. So we can tweet about it, we can add the link to the newsletter, and we can also start planning, look for the thing. We don't need the whole data. So we have one event telling a very detailed piece of the story with this language, and we have a more general purpose event understood by everybody else. You can actually see during the workshop who are the consumers who are interested in picking this event. Oh, when this happens, I have to do this. When this happens, I have to do this. So the shape of the language becomes even visible. The other great possibility of the by-domain events is they allow this type of zooming. What do I mean by zooming? It's just like we're having 3 layers. Maybe we could even have more, but up to now, that's my main 3 format. In the big picture, we're talking about conflicts, goals, blockers, boundaries, people responsibility, and we look for friction. And we are mostly seeing like hotspots, systems, and people. In process modeling, the focus is on policies, commands, and read model. And we are talking about the value, the interaction, individual goals, and so on. And then we then talk about aggregate structure, maybe policies implementation. Again, read modeling, performance design, and yes, IDs and everything else. But these conversations are not separated. They are just the same conversation going back and forth, especially because if you're working on the bottleneck, if you're working on the core, the moment you find the solution, you actually change your business. And it works really well. So your company might not be the same company after you went down, solved the problem, put it in production, and see that, wow, some things have changed. The other thing that was really great overall, after seeing quite a few organizations applying, well, including ours, is providing this clarity, providing this view of what the company was doing was actually really rewarding. Some of the best days when working on my company, I'm happy. When working on some customers, some of the special days, just like when we can get rid of all the technology-driven problems. I mean, that's legacy, that's all this stuff. But when I start feeling the great mood of, I just have people here in this room try to understand their business, try to make the business better in order to make somebody happy. And that's the key result of the whole workshop. And I've seen companies really getting better and by applying this type of approach, because now it's visible and you can self-organize around it. So that's actually my last slide. And yeah, I will accept question, except this one. And yes, so this is thank you. The last thing I would like to provide before the question is, yeah, references, books we might be interested to take a look at. And if you're interested in knowing more about EventStorming, probably the best entry point is eventstorming.com, that contains all the link to the other resources. And yes, getting back to this, and I will, sorry, I will publish it at, okay. Anybody making a picture? Okay. So let's get to any questions. Yes, please.
Yeah, hello. I was really fascinated when you said that in corporations especially, people asked, can you do this remotely? What happens with teams that are not co-located, but they're working on the same project? How do you get them in the same room? They could be in different countries.
Well, I just said, like, I'm not coming if you're not having the people in the same room. So I did very good EventStorming in a couple of months ago in the UK, and half of the company, well, not exactly half, but a lot of people were coming from the United States. They just realized it was strategic, and actually I think it was really good for them to be there, because the company was already getting culturally split in two because this conversation was not happening. So the payoff for doing it was really great. Like, I am a consultant, I am in a privileged position. Like, I know it's not working if people are not there. I'm not interested in doing a workshop which is not working. I'm actually interested in success story. And if you're making the story not a success from the very beginning, I don't even start. I may provide advice, and there's a lot of political leverage in order to, well, maybe you start small, maybe you don't start big picture, you start feature level with a few people involved, looks like this is working, okay, now I believe you, maybe it's time to run a bigger picture workshop with these people, because now we can trust that this is a tool that might be helpful. So it's not really a radical all of nothing approach, but the thing that I don't like is people never use this tool and already ask a variation on a recipe they never tried. Well, what is exactly like, oh, this pizza looked great, can you do it with pineapple? No, the pizza is working like this. And the other thing is, there's so much value in actually having people knowing each other, being in the same room, facing the problem, getting arm-to-arm body touch, like, oh, so it's you asking me for this feature. How do you solve that? I never really understood. This casual conversation actually creates a lot of team feeling, momentum, and this is really invaluable. And but really changes from company to company. Some other times I just wanted to start small, and for some reason I found out that half of the key people of the company were already in there, so the workshop was supposed to be for 15 people. We had something like 28 in the same room, and people were coming from, Germany, England, Australia, United States, Italy, and France. And okay, it was something like a last-minute joining because everybody thought it was valuable. But it's really context-dependent, and you start at the dimension you can manage. And then if it just proves good, you scale up. If it doesn't, well, no problem.
Hi, Alberto. As you know, I did a lot of EventStorming sessions, and the biggest session I had was with 10 people. And as a facilitator, it was pretty intense for me to listen to this discussion and hear definitions. And now in 1 month, I have a storming with 25 people. And how do you do it as a facilitator? Are you just in the background and listen and look for committees? Because I'm I do it like that in the first phase. I just say, put events on the wall just by yourself. And after that, I'm forcing the timeline. But I recognize that sometimes people are like in the one corner discussing, the other, as a facilitator, I can't be at both places at the same time. Yep. So are you more people, or what kind of tips do you have to facilitate in this moment to don't miss important discussions?
Well, one thing is the numbers are different for the type of sessions. Like in a big picture, you're not reaching consensus. So that's the thing that allows you to scale. You're just looking for where people are having a strong conversation. So you're not maybe not understanding the conversation, just a little bit needed to put the hotspot marker. I noticed you. I know there is a problem here. Please stop and move on. That's the only thing you need to do. But yeah, up to 30 people can be doable. Well, actually, the situation with 35 was kind of like, yeah, okay, let's do it anyway. I would probably call another person, but that went actually fine. You cannot have 20, 25 people doing the design activity. Like consensus between 25, no, is not reachable. So if you need to, you need to do a lot of type of game storming activity. It's not a single room, split and merge type of thing if you really have to do it, and probably with more than one facilitator. Even at the large scale picture, well, 30 people, I would go with another facilitator. 2 people, usually one is taking care of the wall of the model, providing help to people that are stuck with the tool and the notation, and one is taking care of people behavior, like this person never talks with this other one. Well, for example, I ran once a workshop with Marco himself, and one of the fun thing was he asked me, have you noticed these 2 persons never actually exchanged a word for the whole day? I didn't, because I was looking for conversation, not the lack of it. But that was really, really valuable, because there was actually something bad going on between these 2 people, and that was really interesting in terms of actually that's my risk management strategy. Project fails because of people and politics, not because of technology. It's not Docker that is going to kill your project. It's somebody in another department, and you already know it from the beginning. You just are too excited to play with Docker to admit it. And so that's the thing I'm trying to see at a very large scale. But yeah, smaller scale, let's say 7 people is a manageable type, maybe even more, but it's funny, it doesn't get that active anymore. But because you're trying to make one single thing consistent, but actually being sitting in a design activity might actually be okay. It's a little bit more like the movie, and people know about one thing and not about the other one. But it doesn't feel like disengaged. Actually, it's different, but that doesn't feel that bad. Large scale, I would say, most of the problems are in the room layout. It's amazing to discover how much a table or the distance between the wall and the table or the actual space you have can shape the conversation. If you don't have enough space, you will usually form 4 or 5 clusters along the way, and it's going to be really hard to enforce the timeline because you can't see the timeline. From this distance, I can only see here. From this distance, I can see the whole thing. But if at this distance there is a table, then I won't be there. So we'll need to be to the other side of the room. That will make me in passive mode because, oh, I need to add a sticky note, but there's this table in the middle. I will add it later. Humans are lazy a lot, and these things are really shaping the behavior of the people in the workshop. So it's, well, take a look at the room, take control of the room, make sure the room is suitable, and if it's not, well, do it somewhere else. I did a lot of modeling in the corridors, in the aisles, in the staircases, not in the elevator, but yes, maybe. But that, I mean, if you break it, you can model vertically. You can scroll up and down. You can't print it, but yes.
Unfortunately, now I have to enforce the timeline. But it's always a pleasure. Yeah. And please leave feedback over there and grab Alberto. He's still around.
Yeah, I'm not leaving.